Hi, everyone, and welcome to week 12. I'm Professor Rios. Hope we're doing well. This week, we're sort of on one of the other spokes of that Himalayan wheel. So we're now south of it in what is often termed the subcontinent, mostly when referring to India, but you could think of it as Bangladesh and Bhutan and Nepal and also Pakistan to some extent. So let's first take a look at the Google Earth image of this. It's a bit of a tour. Let me expand that. And here we see the subcontinent, India, Sri Lanka, the Bay of Bengal, part of the Indian Ocean, part of the Arabian Sea. As you move westward, you get into Pakistan, and one of the most obvious things about Pakistan is the Indus River Valley. So what you're seeing there in green, in the middle of what would otherwise be desert, by the color tan or brown that you see there, is the fact that this river flows through Pakistan regardless of rainfall. And the reason for that being, all that water comes from meltwater in the Himalayas, especially during the melt season, but frankly, all year round. Okay. As you move east across India and Nepal and Bhutan, you have essentially the Himalayan mountains. So this is the crumple zone when the subcontinent or the continental crust that is now India collided with the much larger continental Eurasian plate, creating essentially the tallest mountain chain in the world. This mountain chain contains every single 8,000 meter peak in the world, as in all of them. So that's the 20 tallest mountains on Earth basically are found here. Of course, Mount Everest being the most obvious one, but there's also at the intersection of China, Tibet, Pakistan, and close to India, you have K2. And that's another sort of famous mountain in this region. Of course, this area is the birth of rivers that are very meaningful culturally and also agriculturally. So the Indus River flowing through Pakistan, already mentioned that one. The Ganges River flowing through India, eventually emptying into the Bay of Bengal through Bangladesh. You have the Brahmaputra River, then you have the Meghna River. So these are very meaningful rivers for the purpose of agriculture and also culturally speaking. Okay. Of course, when you talk about India, you're talking about a country with the second most people on Earth, forecast to be the most populated country on Earth, overtaking China sometime in the mid-century. 1.3 billion people, roughly. You have Bangladesh, which is a very, very strongly at-risk country in terms of sea level rise. It is populated by a population of 160 million people. That is 4 Californias worth of people, yet the size of the state of Iowa, roughly. So, of course, when you think about this area, if you sort of zoom out, you're talking about monsoon climate. And monsoon doesn't mean wet or dry, it could mean both. And so in the summer, there's the wet monsoon, which basically you can call it the Indian monsoon because the wind is coming from the Indian Ocean. And in the winter, you have the winter monsoon, the winter coming down the Himalayan mountains, and it's very, very dry. So you have two very distinct seasons. Of course, the only thing that makes it in the news is when it's super wet, right? You're never going to hear in the news Fox, CNN, MSNBC, whomever, they're never going to waste their time telling you, oh, it was super dry and sunny today in India. That doesn't have any appeal. What does have appeal is massive flooding, unfortunately. So that's why you only really hear the wet part of it. This area is getting warmer in terms of ocean temperature, so this is susceptible to tropical cyclones. They call them cyclones in the Indian Ocean, as opposed to a typhoon in the Pacific or a hurricane in the Atlantic. Same thing. So that is the basic, when you think about the area in terms of, if you want to think of it from a color perspective, notice the lighter green transitioning to a deeper, darker green in the sort of lowland forests of India and Nepal. And eventually, as you get closer and closer and closer to the top of the mountains or to the chain, you have, of course, glaciers and snow. So you can sort of see the color. You can see how many towns this area is sort of, and as you zoom in, you see how closely people have sort of pot marked the landscape. So it's a very, very, very populated place. Lots of stark contrasts between haves and have-nots, especially in India, but also true in Bangladesh, quite frankly. So let's go away from Google Earth and get into the actual presentation. So let's look here. Sort of a classic, beautiful image of the Taj Mahal in India. It is one of the sort of like cultural wonders of the world. These are some of the learning objectives. Again, we'll talk about the monsoon in a little bit more detail and the importance to the region. Religion is significant here as well, and we're talking about Hinduism. Hinduism being more of a family trait sort of religion, meaning it's sort of ethnic, as opposed to a religion that anybody could join, like Christianity or Islam or Buddhism. Some of the concepts. And so let's set the boundaries. Again, the second most populous region in the world after East Asia. It is often referred to as the subcontinent, as mentioned before, and these are the countries that make it up. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and let's not forget the Maldives, which is an island chain to the south and west of the southern tip of India. There's some regional unity. It's a shared history and culture, but there's also widespread poverty in the region. Big, stark contrasts. Again, these are some of the physical subregions. So the Maldives will be found down here. The northern mountains, the Indus, Ganges, and Brahmaputra lowlands, meaning this region here. Peninsular India, that would be this. And of course, the southern islands, the Maldives, and Sri Lanka. It is tectonically active. So you have the Arabian Plate, the Eurasian Plate, and the Indo-Australian Plate sort of all coming into action here. This region here, the Andaman Islands, which belong to India, home to the most deadly tsunami in world history, at least modern world history, back in 2004, when over 280,000 people died during that tsunami, which affected India, it affected Sri Lanka, it affected Thailand, it affected Myanmar, it affected the Maldives, it affected Africa, all kinds of places. Of course, I mentioned that it is tectonically active, so in 2015, and this is just to give you a sense of how damaging it can be when the infrastructure is not up to the same code as more developed countries, frankly. So this is why it doesn't have to necessarily be a really strong hurricane for these conditions to be really, really damaging. Okay, a strong hurricane in California will do damage, but the same hurricane in a place like Nepal will do far more damage as a function of the infrastructure that it affects. Again, some of the environmental issues, the Ganges Delta, I'm going to focus primarily on this one, and I'm going to focus on the Maldives as a function of sea level rise. Bangladesh, again, is exceptionally low lying. It has 3 rivers that discharge through it. Of course, you're talking about the idea of low level. They're already at low level. So most of the country sits between sea level and about 4 or 5 feet. So as a result, they are very vulnerable to storms when these storms affect the area. So I always posit the idea that this is a climate refugee disaster in the making, quite possibly one of the biggest ones. It will make what happened in Europe in 2015, 2016, 2017 seem frankly really, really small, because you're talking about a country this big that is 1/4 the size of California. In fact, it's actually about 1/5 the quarter the size of California. So it's really, really densely populated. There's a link to a Bangladesh and climate change documentary in your class week folder for this particular week. Again, that's sort of what it looks like, a little bit more up close. Again, there is the Ganges Delta. That's the Ganges itself, the Brahmaputra, which links into it. And then, of course, the Meghna River, which comes in from the east. So these 3 rivers discharge through this delta in Bangladesh. Again, we'll talk about some of these. So in 1970, for example, the world's most deadly natural disaster, Cyclone Bola, killed an estimated 500,000 people. That's 500,000 people. One storm, one weekend, 500,000, just like that. So the low-lying topography and dense population makes the problem, frankly, worse. It is still a threat today, all these years later, and it's a function of proximity to water, lack of infrastructure, and the freshwater resources being in peril. So this is, things that we, frankly, in the Western world take for granted. We do. I bet you never even think about where your water comes from. You just expect the water to be there when you turn on the faucet, right? So just food for thought. Monsoon. So monsoon literally means seasonal reversal of wind. That's it. This is the definition. Remarkably simple. It comes from the Arabic word mawsum, meaning season. And there are 2 distinct seasons: dry monsoon, November to May, wet monsoon, June to October. Okay, so now it leads to what's referred to as orographic rainfall, meaning rainfall that's enhanced by the fact that the mountains are there and the moisture is forced up and over it, bringing all that moisture out in the form of rain, heavy rain, or snow if you go high enough. So here's sort of an image from your textbook. Again, summer monsoon, the winter coming out of the Indian Ocean, hot, moist air. And in winter, the winter coming out of Asia, or basically Siberia, essentially, and descending down the Himalayas. So they tend to be very, very dry. And it's very distinct, almost like a turning of a switch when they do switch. And it's different than what we're used to in the United States, for example, because our seasons are very changeable. We don't really have a dry season. We don't really have a wet season. We may have a cold season and a warm season, depending on time of year. But as far as precipitation, the Northeast experiences pretty even rainfall amounts throughout the year. This is what climate looks like, and if you focus, whether it's Chennai, Dhaka, Delhi, Cherrapunji, even Karachi, Mumbai, Colombo, there are peaks There are very, very significant, obvious peaks that take place as a result of this sort of seasonal shift that takes place over India. Here's one of the wettest places on Earth, Cherrapunji. Basically, it's about 1,370 meters above sea level, and it receives on average 450 inches of rain a year. That's on average. The records are 366 inches in 1 month. Just think about that for a minute. 366 inches of rain in a month. Just let that sink in. That's roughly what? Over 10 inches a day. In 900 inches in 1 year, or 1 season, basically. So it's a remarkably wet place during the wet season. Some of the other vulnerabilities, of course, sea level rise, mentioned that already. Food security, what if the monsoon becomes unreliable? Hard to tell. And so, for example, energy generation, one of the good things that's happening, India is transitioning to solar and wind quite well. Of course, the problem there is they're already so big that there are many, many, many Indians who rely on biomass, like the burning of stuff, which is very dirty, to supply their energy needs. So lots of good things happening, but there's still a long, long way to go in terms of energy generation. And this is top 10 worldwide as far as solar energy production as a function of, or as a function of capacity as of 2020. Population. Something that is of note in this area is that both India and China, please pay attention to this one, both India and China will have a retired population that will be larger than the entire United States. Think about that one. The number of retired people in India and China by 2050 will exceed 400 million. So as a result, what does that mean to the future? What does that mean to the future of India and China, obviously, specifically? I mean, that's a significant burden to the state and to the government of either of those places. You know, I don't care how big and bad the Chinese economy might be getting, that's something that they're going to have to deal with. How they deal with it, who knows? But it will be an issue. So that's also happening in India. So these are some of the pyramids. So this is one for India. Notice the x-axis is in tens of millions. So there's a slowdown taking place in India. That's probably good. And it's believed that Indians will outnumber Chinese by about 200 million if current trends continue. Here's Pakistan. Fertility rate that's at 3.5. However, falling. It's beginning to slow down there as well. And this is Bangladesh, 2.1, which is called replacement level. And it's on its way to stage 4, a very, very significant slowdown. The problem is they already have a lot of people. So those people will continue to move up this pyramid. The bottom line of this image here is that rapidly changing demographic indicators. All the fertility rates are dropping. That's probably a good thing, with the highest being Pakistan. However, large populations already there. So let's look at some of the migration settlements and landscapes. Most of the migration is this, rural to urban. So this region, along with Africa, is the least urbanized, but it's also the youngest after Africa. So they are distinctly different than all other parts of Asia, Europe, and the Americas. So when you think about this particular region in Asia, along with Africa, primarily sub-Saharan Africa. Some of the migration patterns, again, not necessarily interested in you remembering obviously these numbers, but just the fact that there is migration taking place. And for the most part is from the countryside, if you want to call it that, to cities. So Karachi, the capital, Mumbai, Islamabad, Delhi, Bangalore, big cities like that, Calcutta. Agricultural regions, it's historically low yields. In low areas, salt water can infiltrate and lead to unfortunate issues of salinization and the ruining of water resources. For the most part, it is a low yield agricultural system, primarily focused on subsistence agriculture. Let's look at urbanity. Here's Mumbai, a coastal city. If you look closer, you will find a lot of this. Hutments built on formerly busy sidewalks. There are no sanitary facilities here. This is the Indian version of a favela that we talked about during the Latin America chapter, specifically Brazil. Okay, so the idea or the problem with urban primacy is that cities often are unable to keep up with the growth that is taking place. Again, problems due to rapid growth, inadequate infrastructure. This can lead to political and ethnic tensions. Cities like Delhi, Kolkata, Dhaka, Karachi, Islamabad, Mumbai, India alone has 45 cities of 1 million or more. Just India. And again, India is forecast to have 600 million of its 1.3 billion in cities by the next decade. That's not that far away. Again, here is Dhaka. You can see how congested it is. This is the capital of Bangladesh. And here's Karachi in Pakistan. And you clearly see the influence of the British, former British Empire in the architecture. Urban landscapes, Islamabad. So this is the capital of Pakistan. So like Brasilia in Brazil, Lagos in Nigeria, Canberra in Australia, and Washington, D.C., this is a planned city, meaning they made a concerted effort to invent a place that they could call the administrative center of that country, primarily in the middle, because most cities that were pretty big in the past were all coastal cities. So this is what it looks like, very distinct, with very distinct road systems that are easy to navigate. In this case, Islamabad, there's the church in the distance. It's really not a church, it's a mosque in the distance. This is where the administrative functions of Pakistan are run from. Of course, in Mumbai, you also have this, just like in Brazil. Again, this would be called a favela in Brazil, but you can call it a shanty town. You could call it unimproved or organic settlements that are basically wherever it is possible to set something up in bad land, higher or weird topography. Notice how hodgepodge this looks, immediately next to actual buildings. So this is very congested. Cultural coherence and diversity. Here we're dealing with a well-defined region historically connected by Hinduism. Islam is a new dimension to the area. There's also the influence of the British Empire, so English is a very strong language in here. And there are growing tensions between Islamic fundamentalism and Hindus in the area. India is a secular state since its actual creation, but it has become increasingly under nationalistic Hindu pressures to stress Hinduism above all else. It is, of course, the dominant religion in the area, too. There's this caste system, you've probably heard of it. It's a complex Hindu social order, and while it is essentially legal, it is still largely practiced. So it's a hierarchy. I mean, from an American point of view, oh my God, this would just blow a bunch of brains in the United States media if this was even proposed, right? But it's something that is deeply ingrained in the cultural fabric of this region, and it is a fourfold societal hierarchy. Again, technically illegal, but still used. So there are three groups that are the traditional elite: the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and the Vaishyas. There's the fourth caste, which is a subcaste based on occupation, the Shudras. And then there's this other caste, the Dalits, the so-called untouchables. And these are individuals who engage in unclean occupations and unfortunately can be often highly discriminated against. So this is a very distinctive societal caste system that frankly still exists in India. However illegal it might be, however negatively you may look at it, again, you have to sort of take away your Western and American sunglasses and view it from their point of view. Something that may eventually go away, but it's still clearly tied to daily life in the region. Again, there are some cool videos that I have posted. The caste system from an academic standpoint, and then there's a caste system from a cultural point of view. Okay. Okay, in terms of religion, Hinduism is primary. Islam is a minority religion with smaller Christian subgroups, and Sikhism, which is an offshoot of Hinduism and Islam, primarily located in the Punjab region of India, further west. Okay. Contemporary religion, Buddhism as well, so developed and exported, if you want to think of it this way, from the region, almost entirely gone. So now you think of Buddhism, you think of the Buddha in China, in Japan, you think of it in Korea, in other parts of Asia, as in Southeast Asia. And this religion, Jainism, found in Northwest Asia, a religion based entirely on the ideology of non-violence. Okay. Again, other small groups include Christianity and what would be termed tribal religions. There's the breakdown. Notice Hinduism, yellow, is dominant. Christianity in very small pockets. Islam further west in Pakistan and Bangladesh. Clearly, the Christian influence in India has some genesis in the British colonial influence over the region. So it has sort of lasted well beyond the point when India became independent. Modern religion, so significance to Hindus. This is the Kumbh Mela, which is the largest concentration of humans anywhere on Earth at one time. Okay. There's a great video that will be linked on your class page. Again, it's a mass Hindu pilgrimage celebrated every 3 years or so. at 4 different locations. Every 12 years, there is a really, really large Kumela where over 30 million people visit. Okay. And it's fascinating. If you've ever seen the show or the documentary Watermark, they highlight it there. And people go and they basically dip themselves in the river Ganges as an expression of faith. So again, lots and lots of people. In fact, so many people can be seen from space as a big sort of maroon mark in a way. Okay, there's linguistic diversity in the region as well, of course. You have Indo-European to the north, multilingualism. Clearly, English is something that is dominant in the region. It is what's referred to as an integrating language in India, or a lingua franca. So it's basically the language of commerce and business. It is a language of default. So if you don't speak whatever is spoken in Pakistan or in Bangladesh or in India or Sri Lanka, most people will default to English. And again, here you get a sense of the idea of primary language, even though English is dominant throughout the region. And there you see the different types. As far as a diaspora, which is basically nothing more than a movement away, there are large Hindu populations in Canada, for example, Toronto. You find them in, not surprisingly, the United Kingdom, so Scotland, Wales, England. You find them in parts of the Caribbean, south towards Trinidad and Tobago and the northern areas of Suriname and French Guiana. And then you find them in places like Vancouver, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York City. So very specific areas for them to migrate to, as far as their expression outside of what we would call South Asia. And that's frankly where I'm going to leave it today. Again, it's a very different region in the sense of stark contrasts between the wealthy and the not so wealthy. Population is clearly going to play a big role, and the region is, of course, under threat of sea level rise, which is a big threat, especially if you're a country like Bangladesh, which sits so low to sea level, in between two places, frankly, that don't like you very much. The Indians and the the Indians and the Bangladeshis have never really gotten along. And to the west, and to the east rather, you have Myanmar, which has been a rather closed off society for many, many decades. So Bangladesh finds itself in a really, really, really bad spot. So that's where I'll leave it. If you have any questions, please contact me. I hope you are doing well, and I wish you best of luck with the lesson. Otherwise, if you have any questions, come to the study hour. Otherwise, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.